Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, September 21st, 2022. Today is Tuesday, September 7th, 2022, and I'm recording this from the beautiful Palo Duro Canyon State Park, as you can see behind me. Had a wonderful walk this afternoon, and we are in 1 Samuel chapter 13 today. Chapter 13, verse 1. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. I'm going to say some things about that. We normally don't get into textual criticism much in this study, but this is one of those verses where understanding what different manuscripts say is important. A lot of the oldest manuscripts don't give Saul's age. It gives a word that we don't know how to interpret. Transliterates as Beden. As far as we know, it's not a number. The first manuscripts that we have that give his age, say 30, a lot of them have a space there, knowing that they didn't, the ones in between, I should say, have a space there, knowing they don't have an age. Tradition among the Jews, he was 30. That's a reasonable number. Then how long he reigned was another one of those. The oldest manuscripts we have a space in front of the two, so he reigned space 2 years. Some of them leave out the space, and he reigned 2 years. Well, if you look at everything that he does in the rest of his story, it's not really conceivable he did all that in 2 years. If he was a very, very, very busy man, and basically never ever went home again. Unlikely. The implication when he was anointed king is that he had no sons, or they were very, very young. He was a young man. We know he had sons. They got to be adults and got to fight along beside him. So it would be very hard to have your children grow up in 2 years and become adults. The New Testament says he reigned 40 years. And the Septuagint is the first manuscript, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, is the first one that says 42 years. Again, Jewish tradition says 42 years. But, 42 is a reasonable number. It in certain sense doesn't matter how long he reigned. It's really hard to picture him reigning just 2 years. It's what the text says. But a lot of the oldest texts have a space in front of that too, like there was a number there and they lost it and knew that it should be there and were hoping they could find another copy that had it so they could write it in, and then it didn't happen. For purposes of this study, I'm not going to make a big deal out of how many years he reigned. It's pretty clear he reigned more than 2 years because he did too much to do it all in 2 years. On the other hand, if it's 22 or 32 or 42 years, it really doesn't matter. Even if it was 22 years, he would have been 52. He'd been fairly old. In fact, 52 years in age in battle in that day and time would have been a pretty old man in battle. Even yet, we don't put 52 years old on the frontline troops. Some of them are, you know, leadership and military, but you have to be accomplished to stay in the military until you're 52. Kings obviously have to. It's one of the problems that sometimes we know that the original writings that God wrote down, the original manuscripts, were without error. They're God's word. We know that copyists can make mistakes. We know that translators can make mistakes. And the art and science of textual criticism is the ability to look at all the text we have and make decisions and try to piece out probably what the truth was of the original manuscript. This is one of the few verses where we honestly don't know. Most of the other places where there's questions, there's one reasonable answer for what it is. And honestly, this is the one verse in all of Scripture that has the most theological significance to what we don't know about what it says. And really, does it matter theologically how old Saul was? How long he reigned? Yeah, they're important numbers in one sense. But he couldn't have been much younger than 20 to get to be king and have any meaningful. He probably couldn't be much older than 30 to do all he did as king. And he probably ruled a minimum of 22 years. And that kind of constrains where we can put this. Just logic. And, you know, so the tradition of 30 and 42 is a reasonable number. It would put his death on the battlefield at 72 at a very reasonable number. And even if you're still vigorous, the tale doesn't tell us a whole lot about it. So, you know, this is probably the most consequential verse in all of Scripture we have where we don't fully understand what the full original text was. And it makes no difference theologically. We can trust Scripture. We can trust all of Scripture. It is God-breathed. It is God-preserved. It is definitely worth studying, using to correct our lives. Those who question it are mainly trying to put doubt on God, not they just don't want to obey Him and what Scripture says, and they don't want people committing to Jesus, committing to God, and we have to understand that Scripture is reliable. Scripture is God-breathed. So verse 2, Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. So he selects two groups of professional soldiers. One under his command with 2,000 men, and he puts it at on a hill overlooking one of the main roads entering Israel from Philistine, and then he puts the other one guarding his hometown under Jonathan. Obviously, his hometown, where he rules from, is very important. So he's going to protect it and protect the family and protect, because that's the way they view things. Um, this also put Jonathan closer to the Philistines, and not the first line of where they would likely invade the land, because if they were going to invade the land, Michmash would be a safer route. But from Michmash, he could run out and defend the rest of the land a whole lot quicker than from Gibeah. And you'll have to excuse the flying insects that find me attractive and find the camera lens attractive. You see them flying back and forth. Verse 3, Jonathan attacked the Philistine camp at Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. Then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land of Israel and said, "Let the Hebrews hear." So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become a stench to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. So Jonathan is the one that here is rash. We normally think of Jonathan, he's the good guy in the family. He's the best friend to King David. They had this lifelong, and yes, he's going to become that person. But here he's provoking war when there wasn't a need to. And he attacks the outpost. If he had managed to take it, they might have managed to, in a small skirmish, make a strategic difference between Philistia and Israel. But he didn't succeed. He just attacked it, and therefore gets the Philistines upset, and they're going to call an army together. So Saul understands how this is going to go. He's not just going to sit there and hope that they bid for peace. That's not the way things worked in that day and time. So he calls an army together. So he's going to be able to fight an army with an army. Verse 5, the Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-Evan. When the men of Israel saw their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul has not yet gotten full command of Israel. Yay, we have a king, but we're not going to obey him. If things look dire, we're just going to run away like we have for the last 400 years and hope God protects us. It's not the way this works, folks. If you want a king, you get everything that goes with it. When he tells you to assemble and be an army, you assemble and be an army. You thought you were a farmer yesterday? Man came through town from the king and told you you're now in the army. You're in the army. Don't set up camp and then look at the big field of the Philistines that's on the other side and get scared and go run. And unfortunately, this is what happened. Middle of verse 7. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. So Samuel had sent Saul a message and says, "I'll be there in 7 days." Well, it's 7 days later, and Saul's looking around, and even his professional soldiers are running away. And the Philistines are still milling around in their camp. They haven't invaded. They haven't attacked. Notice they're sitting there at Michmash, where Saul set up a garrison. He set up his garrison in the right spot. He knew where to defend the land, where to put a garrison, that he could defend easily, but it would protect the land, where it would keep the Philistines from invading. They'd have to conquer it first, and he'd have a chance to win, even if he had a smaller force. Also, chariots are useless against a garrison, and he basically made their most powerful part of their army useless. Let's face it, a chariot was in one sense it was the tank of the day. It was a mobile fort. Generally at that time, one person drove and one person handled weapons in it. From a distance, they shot arrows or threw spears or slung stones. Up close, they grabbed generally swords, but sometimes spears or pikes, and fought from the bed of the chariot. And it was the walls protected you from people striking you, stones being thrown, arrows being shot, spears being thrown, things like that. Didn't always stop everything, but it slowed it down enough that your personal armor could do the job and you wouldn't be seriously hurt. And on the other hand, you could stand behind the rampart and, shoot arrows, throw rocks, whatever you were doing. The chariot horses and the chariot themselves were a weapon. The driver could drive through foot soldiers, and the horses run people down, chariots running over people, obviously fairly serious injuries. If you saw a group of your men fighting a group of the others, you could run down the backside of their line. If they jumped out of the way, your men could gang up on those that didn't. If they didn't, you could trample them with the horse or the chariot and injure them, kill them directly. And if not, they'd be injured and at least thrown off balance so your men could attack better. Lots of strategies that a charioteer could use. And exactly how they were used depended upon which army we're talking about and what time period we're talking about. But we don't know much about the Philistines and how they used them, but it's fairly obvious they had developed chariots because chariots were, at the time, basically the only thing effective for fighting other chariots. The Egyptian army, its backbone was a chariot force. And so, the Philistines have a chariot force, so they have some hope of fighting off the Egyptians. Well, if you've got this superior army, when you're going to attack somebody who doesn't have it, are you going to use it? Of course you are. So when they're attacking Israel, they drag out their professional army with their superior weapons, and they go attack. And they have 2,000 chariots, or 3,000 chariots and 6,000 charioteers. What that tells us is it was harder to train charioteers than to build chariots for the Philistines. Most armies that had charioteers, they had more charioteers than they had chariots. The chariots were more durable than the men inside them, and so even if they only held 2 men, you had charioteers sprinkled among the army, generally in the second line, so that should a chariot go down, the charioteer get killed, you could hop in the chariot and suddenly you have a chariot back in use. The Philistines could build more chariots than they had trained charioteers. That probably means their charioteers were not real well trained either. Of course, if you have a chariot and the other guy doesn't, you don't have to be better. It's like if you have a tank and the other guy doesn't. unless he has some sort of handheld tank and a tank weapon, you've got a serious advantage. The Philistines have a serious advantage. The Israelites look at all the Philistine footmen that came out there and think they're as numerous as the sand of the seashore. Probably not. Even if they managed to muster every Philistine man of fighting age, the population in Philistia at the time was probably only about 1.5 million people. So, 400,000 men army is probably an upper limit of what they could field for able-bodied men. But still, at that, I could see the Israelites, if they haven't assembled and organized themselves, they're still waiting on Samuel to get there and bless the troops. They're scared. I mean, what if the Philistines charge today? How are we going to stand up? But Saul's not here. Saul's men are like, God hadn't blessed this yet. What are we going to do? And so Saul makes this foolhardy choice. He decides to act as a priest. Now, he's not a priest. He knows he's not a priest. He knows that Samuel normally acts as the priest. He could have called up some other priest and says, I need a priest. Come serve the country. Come bless the troops. And instead, he does it himself. A terrible decision. And just as he gets finished with the sacrifice, Samuel shows up. So Samuel's own time. Saul was heedlessly worried. Verse 11. What have you done? Asked Samuel. Saul replied, When I saw that the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor, so I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. Saul gives his reasoning and gives it honestly. He gives an honest answer. The problem is he's also showing how anxious he is. He said, when you didn't show up at the set time. Well, let's face it, when you're traveling by foot and you're coming a week, what's a couple hours? Things could have intervened. Here at Paladera Canyon State Park, in April they had a rainstorm, and it washed the road out. It was the person who told me about the road washing out. 2 hours before the road washed out, it was dry here. It was still in drought. Then the rainstorm came up, and the rains washed through the canyon, and they started running over the road. And they were running through the culvert, and then they started running over the road, and the witnesses that saw it heard a noise and saw the asphalt and the culvert wash off downstream. And about 15 minutes after the asphalt washed away, the stream is dry again. The rains have quit. The water's quit running, and what they have in right now is they got a tractor out and pulled the culvert back up and put it in, and put 2 steel plates on top of it, and you can just go bump, bump, up and over the steel plates, over the culvert, and as long as they don't have a rain up here, the road works. It'll take them some months to be able to, get a contract through the state to come build that section of road back. and hopefully put a better culvert in, or better asphalt or something. Israel did not even have that quality of roads. A little storm blowing up and washing out a road, and you having to now detour around and across some other place, easy to see. Saul's delayed. Samuel's delayed half a day. Not a big deal. That's just kind of the way it was then. And Saul should have known that. But no, he's anxious. He's not certain that he's king, his heart. And he's fearful. And he takes things into his own hands instead of consulting God. Verse 13. You acted foolishly, Samuel said. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed a people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. Then Samuel left Gilgal and went to Gibeah in Benjamin, and Saul counted the men who were with him. They numbered about 600. So Saul had lost from 2,000 troops down to 600. I can see why he was concerned. But the thing is, he should know the story of Gideon, who, with 300 men, defeated what was probably 1.5 million man army. So he's got twice that number. If God's on his side, it's easy. If God's not on his side, then it doesn't really matter how many you have. You could have twice as many, and you still won't win. And Samuel pronounces this curse on Saul, that Saul's lineage will not endure. It will not be a king forever under God. That God is looking for a man after God's own heart. And, the implication, a later king will be the man that sets up the lineage that endures forever. And Saul's were quickly end. It's later that we learn exactly when and how short Saul's reign is. But Saul gets this bad news. He counts his troops. He has 600 left where he is. Now, it's interesting. Samuel went to Gibeah. That's where Jonathan was with his 1,000 troops. The implication is he's going to go bless those troops there. See if Jonathan is that man that's the man after God's own heart. Verse 16. Saul and his son Jonathan and the men with him were staying at Gibeah in Benjamin, while the Philistines camped at Michmash. Raiding parties went out from the Philistine camp in 3 detachments, one toward the Ophrah Valley in the vicinity of Sheol, another toward Beth Horon, and the third toward the borderland overlooking the valley of Zeboim, facing the desert. So the Philistines are fairly confident. They think they have a large enough army they can handle the Israelite army and defeat it. And so while they're here, instead of having morale go down, everybody's just sitting around camp, the Philistines say, okay, let's send out 3 raiding parties, go get some booty from land even before we win. After we win, we can get them more booty, but, let's go ahead and start taking profit now. That tells you the kind of warfare they fought. It wasn't about getting and holding territory per se, as much as getting economic good from it. Even armies were a little more than big raiding parties. But they think they're big enough, they can send 3 raiding parties out, 3 different directions through Israel, and be successful and still defeat this little army that's scared of them. And confidence. 19. Not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel because the Philistines had said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines to have their plowshares, mattocks, axes, and sickles sharpened. The price was 2/3 of a shekel for sharpening plowshares and mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for sharpening forks and axes, and for repointing goads. So on the day of the battle, not a soldier with Saul and Jonathan had a sword or spear in his hand. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had them. So, they're fighting with bronze weapons against an army that has iron weapons. Another technological disadvantage. This is the kind of thing that the Israelites were hoping a king would solve for them. Well, the thing is, it takes a king a while to get that kind of thing built up. Building up the technology and the weapons and the army and the ability in the country is not overnight. And they see that the countries with kings, that kind of thing develops, but they don't understand the process. And now they're fighting a battle, and they're even worried, we're behind the times still. Again, they weren't depending upon God. They were depending upon their weapons and their leadership, and they're coming to the limits of what earthly things can do. Only Jonathan and Saul could afford iron weapons. The rest of them had things that the people themselves could make and sharpen, and they didn't have the technology to sharpen the iron tools that they did have. They had to buy them from the Philistines and then go back to Philistia to have them sharpened. Verse 23. Now a detachment of Philistines had gone out to the pass at Michmash. One day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man bearing his armor, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men. Among them was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He was the son of Ichabod's brother Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest at Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. So Jonathan is going out to make a raid or to spy or something like that, the implication is. Probably more spying than raiding, but he's a bold young man, and he's going to do what he can. And he's got a warrior's heart. And he's going to, do what he can to help his father. He does understand that if his father doesn't win this battle, their reign is maybe short, and he may not ever get to be king. That he's got to do the soldierly thing. And he thinks he sees an opportunity, and he takes his armor bearer, and they go. Now, the armor bearer was a warrior in his own right, but in battle, he basically carried the shield in front of the warrior and defended the warrior. He wasn't directly fighting, but he protected him, and armor was heavy in that day and time, and his job, if they weren't fighting, was to keep up with the equipment and haul it around. It was so heavy that if you had your soldier carrying his own armor, when he got to battle, he'd be too tired to fight. So they kind of divided forces. Half the army carried the armor for the other half, and the weapons. And so Jonathan is armor bearer. The two of them are trained together. They're trained to fight as a pair. They're trained to work as a unit. And the two of them go over the Philistine camp and see if they can create some havoc, destabilize the Philistines, make them do something foolish, at least learn something useful for the battle. And so they go over there. Verse 4, on each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez and the other Sina. One cliff stood to the north toward Michmash, the other to the south toward Gibeah. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing will hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Do what you have in mind, his armor-bearer said. Go ahead, I am with you heart and soul. Jonathan said, come then. We will cross over toward the men and let them see us. If they say to us, wait there until we come to you, we will stay there where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands. So Jonathan is being crafty here. He's going to go down the middle of the valley, show himself, and this is earshot from either side of the valley. And it's basically a big gully. You can't climb down and climb up easily. There are ways down and up, but the outposts on either side guard those, so you can't come up the other side safely. Even, well, if somebody lets you up, you can. He was going to go down the middle, and if they say, they were going to show themselves, and if the Philistines basically said, we're going to meet you in the bottom, they would stay there. They weren't going to try to force their way in and by climbing up. If, on the other hand, they'd meet them in the bottom in the valley and take it from there. If, on the other hand, the Philistines invite them up, Jonathan's thinking, if we get past the hard part, the climb up the other side, that means God's handing this outpost to us, and we can win this little skirmish. And so, that's the plan. And so he's probably down in the valley, not necessarily out of arrow range, but out of accurate arrow range. And they can see the arrows coming and dodge them, and if they just decide to start shooting and run back up to the other side. He's not got a lot to lose, and he might do some good. He's got a plan. He's making an attempt. Verse 11. So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. Look, said the Philistines, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they are hiding in. The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. They're being arrogant. And they did what Jonathan had marked as, hey, this is the signal that God's going to give us this outpost. And, the men of the garrison think they can still beat 2 Israelite soldiers by themselves once they get them up. They forget the whole point of their outpost was to keep the Israelites from coming up their side of the creek, the cliff on their side of the creek. So, they're sitting there calling them up, letting them climb safely up the one way up that side. And they're kind of taunting him. Now, Jonathan hadn't been in hiding. Now, they mistake it that they'd been in hiding, and they're coming out. They think they can win. Jonathan thinks in his heart, I can defeat this whole garrison by myself with my armor bearer. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, climb up after me, the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet, with his armor bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. In the first attack, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed some 20 men in an area about half an acre. So when Jonathan gets to the top, he attacks. And what this verse says is basically, Jonathan knocked him down, and the armor bearer killed him. That wasn't the way wars were normally fought at that point in time. But if you're going to do a surprise attack, it's not a bad tactic. Jonathan was just basically tackling and pushing and kicking and shoving. And when somebody went down, the armor bearer was behind Jonathan and stabbed him while on the ground and relatively helpless. And if they were wearing armor, it was sometimes hard to get off the ground. The armor was heavy. It was fairly protective if you were upright, but if you were down on the ground, sometimes it was not real protective. At some angles, it was easy to stab between pieces of armor. They overlapped, but if you were on the ground, somebody could come up from the side that the overlap showed and stick something up through the overlap, and you were vulnerable. In fact, the armor actually guided the weapon into your body. You wanted to stay on your feet. Jonathan was apparently not heavily armored and was, knocking over people that may have been top-heavy and slow. He was depending upon speed and being fast, and his armor bearer was taking advantage of the situation and, well, you're down, let's stab you while you're down. And the two of them are running around this field and attacking and killing, and in a space of about half an acre, they've killed 20 men. Just the two of them by themselves. Not a big victory in the sense of between the two armies. 20 people is an insignificant number. On the other hand, the outpost was protecting the flank, and psychologically, it was pretty serious that 2 men could defeat 20, and now our flank is open and exposed. So psychologically, it was a big victory. Verse 15, then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp and field, and those in the outpost and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. And there is the real reason why the Philistine army panicked. Sure, they probably were expecting that if 2 men killed 20 at the outpost on the flank, that there's probably an army sneaking up that way, and those were the advance guards, and oh, they won, and now, we've got an army pouring in on our flank. In hand-to-hand combat, psychology is very often a very important part of war. And God is, on the other hand, protecting Israel. Saul may be out as king, but God is still protecting Israel. And Samuel is still praying for the Israelites. Jonathan is giving God the credit, and he basically gave God a omen. Hey, if they invite us up, we know you're going to give them into our hands. And then they do, and he has confidence, and he achieves this small-scale victory. Let's face it, 2 men killing 20, is a long odds fight, but they did it. It's a significant battle, um, but as far as the Philistine army, 20 people is nothing. As far as the Israelite army, 2 people is actually not a whole lot either. Um, so, they could have fought their whole skirmish and everybody died, and it really wouldn't have made that much difference. But Jonathan is giving God the credit, so God intervenes and does something miraculous, and the Philistine army gets scared, and the ground shakes, and everybody in the Philistine army gets scared. Not just the ones in the camp that would have heard about it, but the raiding parties that were going through the land. I mean, they were too far away to know what was going on with Jonathan and the army. They would have come back even if they'd had a successful raid and then found the Philistine army defeated. They wouldn't have known. So this is God putting panic in them, putting fear in them, and it's God that's going to cause this victory. And it's basically because Jonathan trusted God. Verse 16, Saul's lookouts at Gibeah and Benjamin saw the army melting away in all directions. Then Saul said to the men who were with him, "Muster the forces and see who's left us." When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor-bearer who were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God." At that time it was with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." What he's doing is he's seeking God's answer in one sense, but he's seeking it through omens, like God is one of the other gods that in the land. All of them, it depends upon which God you're talking about, but it was common for things like they'd look for omens and entrails, and slice open a sacrifice and look at its intestines and try to read portents into the intestines, or pour out a drink offering before their God onto the ground and then look at how it splatters on the ground and read portents into it. Saul's treating the Urim and Thummim like it's a portent. Just, I'm going to ask questions and you're going to reach in and pull out answers from God, and I'm going to know what's going on. And, when Saul realizes that the Philistine camp is in uproar and tumult's going on and they're running away, and he knows that his son and the armor bearer, the only ones missing, everybody else is there. He first starts to then consult God. I mean, when you find out they're melting away and running away, and there's only 2 of your soldiers missing, you kind of know who is scaring them in war sense. And so he's going to consult God. I mean, in a logical sense, that's not when you consult God. You consult God beforehand. Once the other army starts running, then you just attack. It's time to attack. And no, he's playing around with this priest that's a grandson of Eli, and has been cursed to not live long. And he's got him as a priest. Saul's making all kinds of foolish choices. He could have had that guy offer the sacrifice instead of Saul. I mean, he had choices. He made the bad ones. And then, part the way through consulting God, he says, "No, stop. We're done." Verse 20, Then Saul and his men assembled and went to the battle. They should have done that instead of consulting the priest, but part the way through it is not the time. You go ahead and consult God and get the answer and then attack. Don't stop in the middle of it. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines, having gone up with them to their camp, went over the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. And when all the Israelites who had hidden in the hills country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in hot pursuit. So the Lord rescued Israel that day, and the battle moved on beyond Beth-aven. They win the battle despite Saul and all his foolish choices. I'm going to stop here because when we get to verse 24, we start another part of this story that shows Saul's foolishness. But, God was still saving Israel. He may have picked a king that was a fool because he was head and shoulders higher than everybody else. He was a big man. But he doesn't make wise choices. And Israel's fixing to find out the wise choices are going to be more important than a size. Sure, in hand-to-hand combat, size is important. Strength, reach, ability to throw, ability to hit, ability to stab. All those things increase with size. And so a big guy on the battlefield is naturally somebody you'd want to trust. If he stays and does his job, he's better than a smaller guy. But if he's a fool, it doesn't matter if he's a perfect warrior. He's not. But if he was, he still wouldn't win the battle. Jonathan is the one that executed the battle and caused it to win. And the psychology shifted. In a morning's time, it went from the Israelites being the ones that were scared and running away to the Philistines were the ones that were scared and running away. And the Israelites went out and chased them. And everybody who had been trying to hide or trying to run away suddenly joined battle because, oh, we're winning now. And that's unfortunately the way very often battles in that day and time went. Those who were, winning, they got more courage and more strength. And those who were losing lost what little courage they had and ran away. And so the size of the army doesn't matter as much as their determination. And in this case, determination comes from God. And that's pretty obvious from this passage that their determination comes from God Almighty. And God chose to use Jonathan to break the spirit of the Philistines, and then Saul led the assault that finished the job, and the Israelites joined with him, and they won the victory. And they chased them out of the countryside and killed all along the way. Oh Lord, you are the Lord of hosts. You are the one who is victorious in battle, not because always your forces have greater numbers, or stronger weapons, or better tactics, but because, Lord, you are sovereign over the whole earth. You will use whatever is necessary to win, whether it is psychology and strategy, or better weapons, or better numbers, or better organization, or you will turn some other circumstances to bear. You put a quaking of the ground in so that the Philistines would get scared, so that they would think that Jonathan and his body, his armor bearer, was a prelude to invasion, and they would run in terror. Lord, you gave Jonathan, the armor bearer, the strength to kill 20 men in a surprise attack, and do so quickly. valiantly. Lord, you use men like that. Have us to be that kind of bold, that we would share faith in you, that we'd share that Jesus is the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, that he's Savior, and that he wants people to have a relationship with him, with you. Lord, help us to be valiant soldiers of the cross, witnesses to the greatest thing in human history. Lord, help us to understand that the battle does not go to the strong or the swift or the tall but it goes to who you choose. And you do not lose in the long scope of history. You were still bringing the Israelites out, still causing them to conquer the land and to win. You're still in that nation building business. You're still going to win. Lord, help us to be your servants in the meantime. In your gracious name, amen. And this has been your host, Frank Rike, and we have been in 1 Samuel chapter 12 and 13 today. I hope to see you at church Sunday. If not, I hope to see you Wednesday. And if nothing else, I'll see you here on YouTube. Have a blessed week.